It was July 4th, 1949. For Daniel Fry, a rocket technician employed by Aerojet at the vast White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, it was Independence Day. No, not the movie, but pretty damn close. Fry had originally planned on going to the town of Las Cruces to celebrate with his colleagues, but missed the bus and so went back to his room to study a book on heat transfer, and soon became aware of the problems of heat transferring the wrong way. The air conditioning system broke down, it became unbearably hot, and so he, ironically, decided to take a walk outside in order to escape the heat inside. He decided to walk to the old static test stand, where Aerojet, at the time, were mounting their largest rocket engine for tests. Fry was a rocket test technician. All this was normal for him, so he thought little of it, then took a route leading toward the base of the Oregon Mountains. And then he noticed something. In the evening sky, he noticed one star, then another, then two more, going out. Suddenly, the outline of an object of some sort, blending with the dark blue of the sky, swooped down in his direction. As it continued to come toward me, I felt a strong inclination to run, he said, but experience in rocketry had taught me that it's foolish to run from an approaching missile unless you are sure of its trajectory, since there is no way to judge the trajectory of an approaching object if you are running. The object was now less than a few hundred feet away, moving more slowly, and seemed to deaccelerate. Its shape was a sphere, with a diameter, at its largest part, of about 30 feet. Somewhat reassured by its rapid deacceleration, remembered Fry, I remained where I was, and watched it glide, as lightly as a bit of thistledown, floating in the breeze. About 70 feet away from where I was standing, it settled to the ground, without the slightest bump, or jar. Except for the crackling of the brush, upon which it had settled, there had been no sound at all. For what seemed like a long time, I stared at the now motionless object, as a child might stare at the rabbit, which a stage magician has just pulled from his hat. I knew it was impossible, but there it was. Fry had been employed, for many years, in aeronautics, but had never seen such a device. As vice president of Crescent Engineering and Research Company in California, he developed a number of parts for the guidance system of the Atlas missile. While at Aerojet, he was in charge of installation of instruments for missile control and guidance systems, but he'd seen nothing like this. He then cautiously approached, to within a few feet of the landed craft, and listened for any sign of life. There was none. I began to circle slowly about the craft, so that I could examine it more completely. It was a spheroid, considerably flattened at the top and bottom. The vertical dimension was about 16 feet, and the horizontal dimension about 30 feet, at the widest point, which was about 7 feet from the ground. Its curvature was such that, if viewed from directly below, it might appear to be saucer-shaped, but actually it was more like a soup bowl, inverted over a sauce dish. The dark blue tint, which it seemed to have when in the air, was gone now, and the surface appeared to be of a highly polished metal, silvery in colour, but with a slight violet sheen. I walked completely around the thing, without seeing any sign of doors, windows, or even seams. I stepped forward and cautiously extended my index finger until it touched the metal surface. It was only a few degrees above the air temperature, but it had a quality of smoothness that seized my attention at once. It was simply impossible to produce any friction between my fingertip and the metal. No matter how firmly I pressed my finger on the metal, it drifted around on the surface, as though there were a million tiny ball bearings between my finger and the metal. I then began to stroke the metal with the palm of my hand, and could feel a slight but definite tingling in the tips of my fingers and the heel of my palm. Suddenly, a loud male voice came out of nowhere. "Better not touch the hole, pal, it's still hot." Shocked, Fry leapt back several feet, catching his heel in a low bush, and sprawling full length in the sand. Something like a low chuckle was heard, then the voice came back. "Take it easy, pal, you're among friends." Recovering himself, Fry looked around for some person or gadget from which the voice came, but could see none. He complained to the voice that it should turn the volume down. "Sorry, buddy, but you were in the process of killing yourself, and there wasn't time to diddle with the controls," came the response. "Do you mean the hull is highly radioactive?" asked Fry. "If so, I am much too close." "It isn't radioactive in the sense that you use the word," replied the voice. "I used the term hot because it was the only one I could think of, in your language, to explain the condition. The hull has a field about it, which repels all other matter. Your physicians would describe the force involved as the anti-particle of the binding energy of the atom." The voice expounded at length, saying, "When certain elements, such as platinum, are properly prepared and treated with a saturation exposure to a beam of very high energy photons, the anti-binding technology particle will be generated outside the nucleus. Since these particles tend to repel each other, as well as other matter, they, like the electron, tend to migrate to the surface of the metal, where they manifest as a repellent force. The particles have a fairly long half-life, so that the normal cosmic radiation received by the craft, when in space, is sufficient to maintain an effective charge. The field is very powerful at molecular level, but, like the binding energy, it follows the seventh power law, so the force becomes negligible, a few microns away from the surface of the hull. Perhaps you noticed that the hull seemed unusually smooth and slippery. This is because your flesh did not actually come into contact with the metal, but was held a short distance from it, by the repulsion of the field. We use the field to protect the hull from being scratched or damaged during landings. It also lowers air friction greatly when it becomes necessary to travel at high speed through any atmosphere. The craft produces an almost perfect laminar flow of any air or gas about the craft, and little heat is generated or transmitted to the hull.
But how would this kill me? Fry moved. And what did you mean by that remark about my language? You sound pretty much American to me. Replying to the first question, the voice explained that Fry would probably have died within a few months from exposure to the force field, which produces
what you would describe as antibodies in the bloodstream that are absorbed by the liver, causing the latter to become greatly enlarged and congested. In your case, the exposure was so short and over such a small area that you are not in any great danger, although you will probably feel some effects sooner or later, provided, of course, that your biological functions are similar to ours, and we have good reason to believe that they are. As to your second question, I am not an American such as you, nor even an Earthian, although my present assignment requires me to become both. The fact that you believe me to be one of your countrymen is a testimonial to the effort I have expended to learn and to practice your language. If you talked with me for any length of time, however, you would begin to notice that my vocabulary is far from complete. Who knew? And many of the words would seem outdated and perhaps obsolete. As a matter of fact, I have never set foot upon your planet.
Oh, you think?
It will require at least 4 more of your years for me to become adapted to your environment, including your stronger gravity, your atmosphere. I will also require the quick cooperation of someone like yourself, who is already a resident of the planet.
Fry was then stood there, somehow, wondering what the actual hell was going on. The voice then explained,
one of the purposes of this visit is to determine the basic adaptability of the Earth's peoples, particularly your ability to adjust your minds quickly to conditions and concepts completely foreign to your customary modes of thought. Previous expectations by your ancestors, over a period of many centuries, met with almost total failure in this respect. This time, there is hope that we may find minds somewhat more receptive, so that we may assist you in this progress, or at least in the continued existence of your race. The fact that, in spite of being in circumstances completely unique in your experience, you are calmly listening to my voice and making logical replies is the best evidence that your mind is of the type we hope to find.
Fry, definitely not feigning not having his ego stroked here, thanked the voice, but pointed out that would mean he would be involved in some kind of project to advance the people of Earth.
Why me?
Why me, he said. Is it just because I accidentally happened to be here when you landed? I could easily put you in touch with a number of men right here at the test base, who could be of far more value to you than I.
Perhaps they could, but why would they? If you think you're here by accident, you greatly underestimate our abilities. Why do you think the dispatcher at your motor pool gave you incorrect information? Why did you think your air conditioning system had failed tonight when, as a matter of fact, it was functioning perfectly? Why do you think you turned off on this small road when your intention had been to go to the static test stand? And finally, why do you think you changed your mind about going back to your base to report the arrival of our sampling carrier? It is seldom that we superimpose our will on that of others, but there is a case of such urgency for your people that we feel an exception to the rule was warranted.
The voice went on to request Fry's assistance in a planned program for the welfare and for the preservation of Earth's people. Several years would pass, Fry was told, before his services would be required.
We will be glad to offer you a short test flight in the sampling craft if it will help you to decide that we are to stay and that our technology has much for you to learn, said the voice, and continued. Unfortunately, the craft is a remotely controlled sampling device, or cargo carrier, and while I am speaking through its communication system, I am not in it. I am in a much larger, deep space transport ship, or what you would call a mothership. At present, it is some 900 of your miles above the surface of your planet, thank God, which is as close as ships of this size are permitted to approach any planet with an appreciable atmosphere. I wonder why.
The cargo craft is being used to bring us samples of your atmosphere so that my lungs may gradually become accustomed to it. Why the fuck do I sound like auto-tune? All of your previous atmosphere that was in the craft was allowed to escape while it was in space by the opening of the remotely controlled valve at the top. There is now an almost perfect vacuum inside. When the port is again opened, which I shall do now, your air will rush in to fill the craft, and we will have a large-scale sample of your atmosphere, together with any microorganisms which may be present in it. We need these also for study and for immunization. Your breathing of the atmosphere during this short demonstration flight will, of course, distort this particular sample somewhat, but we will have ample opportunity to obtain others before my adaptation to the environment of your planet is complete. Hee hee. A sound, partly a hiss and partly a murmur, came from the top of the craft for about 15 seconds. Any port large enough to have filled a ship of that size with air in 15 seconds should have produced quite a roar, Fry thought. I realised then that the walls of the ship were almost, if not entirely, soundproof, and since most of the sound of the entering air would be produced inside, very little would be audible outside. A single click was then heard, coming from the lower wall of the craft, and a section of the lower hull moved back on itself for a few inches, then moved sideways, disappearing into the wall of the hull, and leaving an oval-shaped opening, about 5 feet in height, and some 3 feet wide in width at its widest point. Fry walked toward the hatch, and, ducking slightly, went inside the craft. With his feet still on the ground, he looked around. The compartment into which I was looking occupied only a small portion of the interior of the ship. It was a room, about 9 feet deep and 7 feet wide, with a floor about 16 inches above the ground, and a ceiling between 6 and 7 feet above the floor. The walls were slightly curved, and the intersections of the walls were beveled, so there was no sharp angles or corners. The room contained 4 seats. They looked much like our modern body contour chairs, except they were somewhat smaller. The seats faced the opening in which I was standing and were arranged in rows, of 2 each, in the centre of the room, leaving an aisle between the seats in either wall. In the centre of the rear wall, where it joined the ceiling, there was a small box or cabinet, with a tube, and what appeared to be a lens arrangement. It was somewhat similar to a small movie picture, camera, or projector, except that no film spools or other moving parts were available. Light was coming from the lens. It was not a beam of light, such as would have come from a projector, but a diffused glow. Fry noticed the seats and the light seemed to be the only furnishings in the bare metal room. Not a very inviting cabin, he thought. Looks more like a cell. It is only a sampling carrier, and was not really intended or designed to carry passengers. The small compartment was designed for emergencies only, but you will find the seats quite comfortable. Step in and take a seat, if you wish to make this test flight. Fry stepped up to the door and headed toward the nearest seat. As he did so, he heard a click, as the door began to slide out of the recess in the wall behind him. Instinctively I turned, as though to leap out to the comparative safety of the open desert behind me, but the door was already closed. If there was a trap, I was in it now, and there was no point struggling against the inevitable. Where would you like to go? Asked the voice, now, Jesus Christ, seeming to come from all around him. I don't know how far you can take me, in whatever time you have, he replied, and since this compartment has no windows, it won't matter in which way you go, as I won't be able to see anything. You will be able to see, at least as much as you could see from any of your vehicles, in the air at night. If you would like a suggestion, we can take you over the city of New York, and return you here in about 30 minutes. At an elevation of about 20 of your miles, the light patterns of your major cities take an especially fascinating appearance, which we have never seen in connection with any other planet. To New York, and back, in 30 minutes, scoffed Fry. Your minutes must be very different from ours. New York is 2,000 miles from here. A round trip would be 4,000 miles. To do it in half an hour would require a speed of 8,000 miles per hour. How can you produce and apply energy to the craft like this, and how can I take the acceleration? You don't even have belts on these seats. You won't feel the acceleration at all. Just take a seat, and I will start the craft. Fry took the seat, nearest to the door, noticing that the seat seemed to be moulded, without bolts, rivets, or screws. I will now turn off the compartment light and activate the viewing beam. For a moment, the room became completely dark. Then a beam of light came from the projector. The beam, or the part of it which was visible at all, was a deep violet, at the very top of the visible spectrum. The beam was focused, so as to exactly cover the door through which I came, and under its influence, the door became totally transparent. It was as though I were looking through the finest type of plate glass, or lucite window. As you see, the door has become transparent. This startles you, because you're accustomed to thinking of metals as being completely opaque. However, ordinary glass is just as dense as many metals, and harder than most, yet transmits light quite readily. Most matter is opaque to light, because the photons of light are captured and absorbed in the electron orbits of the atoms through which they pass.
This went on and on for a while, and then the ship suddenly took off. Fry remembered, I did not feel the slightest sense of motion myself, and the ship seemed to be steady as a rock. The lights of the army base at the proving ground, which had been hidden by a low hill, instantly came into sight. A few seconds later, the lights of the town of Las Cruces came into view, and I knew that we must have risen at least 1,000 feet in those few seconds. The ship was rotating slightly to my left as it rose, and I was able to see the highway from Las Cruces to El Paso. I could even distinguish the very thin line of the Rio Grande. The surface of the earth appeared to be glowing, with a slightly greenish phosphorescence. The sky outside the ship had become much darker, and the stars seemed to have doubled in brilliance. He assumed the craft had now entered the stratosphere, reaching an altitude of 10 miles in less than 20 seconds, without the slightest sense of acceleration. The voice then explained he'd go up to 30 miles and said, "The idea is simply that the force, which we use to accelerate our vehicles, is identical in nature to a gravitational field. It acts not only upon every atom of the vehicle, but upon every atom of mass that's within it, including the mass of the pilot and any passengers. Regardless of the intensity of the field, therefore, every particle of mass within the influence of the field is in a uniform state of acceleration, or as you would term it, free fall, with respect to the field. Under these circumstances, acceleration has no effect upon the vehicle or anything within it." "But in that case," asked Fry, "why am I not floating around in the air, as things are supposed to do, in a missile that's in free fall?"
"Before the ship's own field was generated, it was resting upon the earth, and you were resting upon the seat. There was a force of one gravity acting between your body and your seat. Since the force, which accelerates both the ship and your body, acts in exact proportion to the mass, and since the Earth's gravity continues to act upon both, the original force between your body and the seat will remain consistent."
Fry then asked him how the huge energy was generated, and the entity said there were several concepts and words which didn't yet exist in the human vocabulary, so he couldn't explain. Fry then asked the entity's name, to which he responded,
"We have names, though there is seldom any occasion to use them among ourselves. If I become a member of your race, I shall use the name Alan, which is a common name in your country, and is nearly the exact same as my name, which is pronounced as though it were spelled Alan."
Alan said that, whenever it became necessary, Fry would be contacted again through his, quote, frequency pattern. Meanwhile, the craft had flown over New York City, at 20 miles and 600 miles an hour, giving him a wonderful view over the city and all the twinkling lights. And then Fry was asked if he wanted to experience free fall.
"To reach this condition fully, under the present circumstances, would be somewhat dangerous, but we could approach it closely enough, so that while you will still retain some stability, you will experience the sensation of weightlessness."
Instantly, the compartment light came on, Fry remembered. While I was attempting to adjust my eyes to the light, my stomach suddenly leapt upward toward my chest. There was no sensation of falling. It was simply as though my organs, having been released from a heavy strain, were springing upward like elastic bands when released from tension. In a few seconds, I felt almost normal again. Putting down with his hands on the seat, he then rose slowly to the ceiling, though his body rotated and tipped forward, so that he came to rest with his knees on the chair and his eyes only a few inches from the black cushion. It was then that Fry noticed a curiously earth symbol imprinted on the seat. The Caduceus, the snake. It is found, in one form or another, in the legends, the inscriptions and the carvings of virtually every one of our early races, he thought, to which Alan responded that the serpent wasn't just restricted to Earth because...
"Perhaps because life is said to originate in the waters of a planet, and the undulations of a serpent are a convenient symbol for the waves of the sea. The tree is almost always the symbol of life, beginning in the sea, rising to the atmosphere, and finally into space. Your people, and some of mine, including myself, have at least in part a common ancestry. Tens of thousands of years ago, some of our ancestors lived upon this planet, Earth. There was, at the time, a small continent, in a part of the now sea-covered area, which you have named the Pacific Ocean. Some of your ancient legends refer to this sunken landmass as the lost continent of Lemuria, or Mu. Our ancestors, the Mu-Mus, not really, had built a great empire and a mighty science upon this continent. At the same time, there was another rapidly developing race upon a landmass in the southwest portion of the Pacific Atlantic Ocean. In your legends, this continent has been named Atlantis."
Alan told Fry that they would continue the discussion, Jesus Christ, during another meeting, since time was up and they'd landed back at White Sands.
It is on the ground now, and I will open the door. We will wait until you're a little distance from the craft before we retrieve it. Take care of yourself until we return.
Shocked, Fry jumped out of the craft. Then after he'd got a few feet, the door had closed behind me, and as I turned, a horizontal band of orange-coloured light appeared about the central, or widest, part of the ship, and it leapt upward, as though it had been released from a catapult. The air rushing in to replace that which had been replaced upward impelled me a full step forward, and almost caused me to lose my balance. I managed to keep my eyes on the craft, while the band of light went through the colours of the spectrum, ranging from orange to violet. As the light went through the violet band, the craft had risen, several thousands of feet in the air, and I could follow it no longer. Fry then went back to work, and found himself mind-numbingly depressed. A few hours before, I had been a rather self-satisfied engineer, setting up instruments for the testing of one of the largest rocket motors in existence. While I realised my part in the project was a small one, I felt that, through my work, I was travelling through the forefront of progress. Now I knew that rocket motors had been obsolete for thousands of years. I felt like a small and insignificant cog. He also told nobody of the experience, partly because he felt he'd implicitly promised Alan not to, and partly because he thought no one would believe him. However, the alien returned, or at least his voice. One evening, after Fry had driven from his quarters at the H building to the test site's instrument room, he saw an unusual glowing object, about a foot in diameter. Walking toward it, he suddenly heard Alan's voice, as if beside him. Jesus.
Yes, Dan, it's ours. Since we are now using the sampling craft now, we thought it best to send down a small communications amplifier. We could get along without it, but it does reduce the chance of error in our communications to almost to zero, unfortunately.
After allowing Fry to calm down, Alan went on to explain that he would eventually be able to successfully adapt his body to Earth's environment, but he would need Fry's help.
If you do not wish to assist us, all memory of this meeting and the previous one will be erased from your mind. If, on the other hand, you do decide to assist us, you may find yourself in a situation that is not easy to endure. The only reward we can promise you is the inward satisfaction of having assisted in the survival of your race, and the acquisition of considerable knowledge and understanding that you would not otherwise be able to gain.
Obviously, Fry agreed to this agreement. It, however, was not easy. Alan asked Fry to gather a number of textbooks dealing with the English language and math. Alan explains his system was based on the multiples of 12, rather than 10, and it would take him a while to master the new language. These textbooks, he said, should be placed on a certain ledge, at the test stand, where they would be collected by a small sampling device, then analysed, copied and returned within 24 hours. The arrangement worked well. Somehow nobody noticed Fry moving these books, and nothing went wrong. On occasion, Fry got books like the Bible from the base library, and on each occasion they were returned safely. I'm surprised Fry wasn't nervous. Giving aliens human books, especially from the base, could be construed as supplying military information to a foreign power, but on each occasion, the books were returned safely, and nobody accosted Fry about them. It wasn't until 1954 that Fry would re-establish contact with Alan, and just as before, it was dramatic. One day, relaxing in his cabin in the woods, telepathy was established, and Alan admonished Fry for not making his contacts public. Fry said he wasn't sure if he should, and Alan said,
"Those who are not blind to the truth can recognize the value of a message, regardless of the status of the messenger. Our estimate of 4 years for adaptation to your environment was over-optimistic. The actual time will be closer to 5. In the meantime, one of your major problems is becoming critical. Unless some small balancing force is applied, in the right quarters, your entire civilization may wipe itself out before we are in a position to be of assistance."
Fry was asked to write down his experiences in a book, and to repeat through newspapers, radio and television what he'd learned. "You don't realise what you're asking," said Fry. "If I attempt to make public the information you've given me, it will only mean that I will be scorned and ridiculed. If I give a statement to our newspapers, they will either ignore it, or print a comic, distorted version."
"Of course you will be ridiculed. Ridicule is the protective barrier which the timid or the ignorant erect between themselves and any possibility that frightens or disturbs them. It is the price extracted from every individual who is as much as one step in advance of his fellows."
"Why don't you just send a small landing craft down on the White House lawn some morning, ask for worldwide communication facilities, and give your information, and ask for advice to the whole world at once?"
Such a simple solution is only wishful thinking on your part. If you think a little, you will see there are many reasons why such a course would not be successful. If we were to appear as members of a superior race, coming from above, to lead the people of the world, our arrival would seriously disrupt the ego balance of your society. Tens of millions of people, in their desperate need to avoid being demoted to the second place in the universe, would go to any lengths to disprove or simply deny our existence. If we took steps to force the acceptance of our reality upon their consciousness, about 30% of the people would insist upon considering us as gods and would attempt to replace upon us all responsibility for their own welfare. Most of the remaining 70% would adopt the belief that we were planning to enslave their world and would seek out means to destroy us. If any great and lasting good is to come from our efforts, they must be led by your own people, or at least those who are accepted as such.
No, the correct method was to use some kind of subterfuge. Alan mentioned he'd need a passport to travel under the alias of a human, but had no birth certificate, saying it was impossible, claiming,
"Since my origin was actually extraterrestrial, there is no legal way in which I can obtain either a birth certificate or a passport, yet I must have both. It was therefore necessary to find a country registrar who could understand the need for my being here and be willing to assist, even at some risk to himself. We will arrange for you to meet him, and you must become well acquainted, since it will be up to you to conduct the negotiations."
Alan explained that for a human, guys, the best thing would be an international businessman or purchasing agent, but money was an issue because
"It seems that for most of your money systems, they're related to the value of gold. I will therefore exchange a few pounds of metal and have it delivered to you here, so you can exchange it for your currency and open an account in my name."
Fry, however, refused, saying gold presented a problem because you had to trace its origins, to which Alan said,
"Very well, platinum it will be, although it seems strange to think of it as having so much value among your people. While platinum is an excellent substance for the planting of surfaces that will be exposed to corrosion, and most of our ships are plated with it, it has few other uses in our technology."
The conversation then switched to other issues, and he went on to describe to Fry what he described as a conflict that had destroyed an ancient civilization. The survivors landed on the mountains in what is now Tibet, and
it was suggested that an attempt be made to reach another planet. The aerial craft then in use were capable of travelling in space and had frequently been used to reach elevations of hundreds of miles, but no attempt had yet been made to leap the vast gulf between planets, and the crew members were far from certain that such an attempt could succeed. The planet which you now know as Mars was then in conjunction with the Earth, and preliminary estimates seemed to indicate the crossing could be made. At the time, the surface conditions of the temperature, atmosphere, water, etc. were better suited for human survival than the conditions your astronomers report to exist today. A vote was taken, and the members of the crew of the craft elected to take the huge gamble in the hope of preserving, thereby, at least a portion of the culture of their race. The remaining crews decided to remain on Earth.
Allegedly, this civilization had achieved total equality of the sexes. Of the 4 craft which essayed the Great Leap, 3 arrived safely at their destination, and Alan taught this to Fry as a lesson about how
the greatest need for your race, your civilization, and your society today is basic understanding between man and his fellow man, between nation and nation, and between all men, and that greater power and intelligence pervades and controls all nature. Understanding this is the key to survival.
Alan also told Daniel something amazingly ahead of its time, about why they simply couldn't land on the White House lawn.
"From the practical standpoint, you know as well as we that if we were to land our craft near the seat of your government, we would immediately be surrounded and taken in charge by those military forces whose duty it is to protect the heads of your government from any possible danger. We will be questioned for hours, perhaps days, before any request which we might make would even be given consideration. We would then be forced to display our superiority in the realm of the material science. Once this superiority has been achieved, the military leaders would undoubtedly adopt the position that it was imperative that their country acquire and protect this advanced scientific knowledge. The attitude of your government, in common with the governments of other nations of your planet today, is that all knowledge, particularly scientific knowledge, is the property of the state. If we were to land in your country, your government would attempt to keep it a secret, but it would not succeed, any more than it succeeded in keeping the secrets of its nuclear weapons. The government of Russia is being appraised of the fact that the military forces of the United States, the government of Russia, upon being appraised of the fact that the military forces of the United States were acquiring highly advanced technical knowledge, would decide that the only hope of avoiding complete destruction by the United States was to launch an immediate attack. Have you so soon forgotten the lessons of your Pearl Harbor that you do not realize this?" He then gave Daniel a lesson on how humanity needed to develop the, quote, spiritual science, the social science, and the physical or material science, spoke about the huge dangers of nuclear weapons, and other things. And Daniel Fry, when he published these claims, went huge, especially because he was a reputable technician who clearly knew what he was talking about. He had advanced knowledge of aerodynamics, was well educated, had a top position within the government. He was even Dr. Daniel Fry, PhD, from the St Andrews College of London, England. Or was he? Because this is when Fry's claims begin to get a little bit ludicrous. There is no St Andrews College in London. And furthermore, he also awarded himself, he was given, the, quote, dignity degree of Doctor of Philosophy in, squints at paper, Cosmism, which was given to him by the, quote, St Andrews Ecumenical University Intercollegiate. And inquiries by Philip Klass, a vocal skeptic, revealed that the college was an Asian-style, quote, correspondence school, where anyone could apply for a PhD by sending in their thesis, not including a modest fee, of course, and get a degree. This scientist, in quotes, responded that he, wouldn't you know, didn't even think you could buy a degree there, despite going there, in quotes, and that he never paid anything, nor was he asked to. But Dan, a critic argued, a PhD is normally associated with a recognised university. You can surely sympathise with scientists when they become suspicious of a man who is trying to make his PhD look like an accredited doctorate. I've never attempted to make it look like that, Fry said. It's been others who have done that. It doesn't make any difference to me. It may not have made a difference to him, but by allowing the PhD, in quotes, to appear on the jackets of his books and publications, as well as on his stationery, it certainly made a huge difference to the degree of acceptance of his claims, and his books, which, as he admitted, at least one falsehood was included in. In all editions of his first book, The White Sands Incident, the date of the incident is first given as July 4th, 1950. Yet, 10 years after publication, he admitted the incident actually occurred on July 4th, 1949. I had to change it, he explained, somewhat sheepishly. In the last edition, I told the publisher to change it, but he decided this might not be good for publicity, and he kept it to 1950, after I'd said to change it, because there was now no need to hide the fact that it was 1949, because it turned out to be a year later than he had originally planned, that Alan could be here. He thought it could be done in 4 years. It actually took 5 years. Sure it did. Fry also claims he took the book to Aerojet, asked them if there were any security violations, they said no, and the book was immediately put on base shelves, under non-fiction. And, to back up his claims, people point out that the president of Aerojet served as Secretary of the Navy. It was linked to the Army and CIA, and close to the government, which gives it some credibility. But in my eyes, absolutely diminishes its credibility, because for decades, the US government has been disseminating disinformation on UFOs to hide its weapon projects. From Paul Benowitz being misled, to Stephen Greer being linked to the CIA, time and time again, the US government has, quote, released information that it's working for aliens, only for it to turn up time and time again as utter bullshit. I trust nothing that comes from the rootless cosmopolitan neo-globalist Zionist degenerate elite, and neither should you. And neither should we also trust Fry's photos, which, even to the naked eye, are kinda suspicious. After some of the money had dried up in the 1960s, what do you know? Fry suddenly began, quote, taking photos of alien ships, which don't exactly look convincing. One photo, which even Fry-sympathetic author Timothy Good has in his possession, is supposed to show an object in Oregon, in May 1964, and looks suspiciously like a group of lampshades fixed together, and suspended with fine twine, and moves like a model on a string. It, and his other photos, look blatantly fake. Some have claimed, such as Good, but one photo he took in 1954 doesn't look fake. But it looks like the others, and even if it's less sus, it doesn't make it convincingly sus. Furthermore, look at the video. Daniel Fry's 1964 Oregon UFO, in quotes. The most revealing thing is that the craft's motion looks exactly like a hanging, spinning model. See for yourself. The first thing to note is that the second clip is slowed down. If you watch both clips, side by side, compare the speed at which the noise, those black dots and streaks appear on the screen. It's clear this second clip has been slowed down. Furthermore, the second clip is much darker than the first, and the first thing the second clip makes clear is that it's a film of a film. If you look at the top right of the second clip, as it plays, you can see a bent corner, and then the camera is moved down slightly to hide the top right corner of the film being filmed, not doing a good job of it, and then revealing the bottom edge. I've put two screenshots next to each other. The first is before the camera is moved down, and the second after. Look how, in the left first picture, the top right has a rounded edge, and in the second bottom picture, after the camera moves down, the bottom right is somehow curved. It's blatantly obvious that Daniel played the first film through a projector, then slowed the film down,
which slowed the noise. Then, likely using the same camera, he filmed the first film a second time, which reduced its brightness. He was trying to make it look like the model was moving, without the telltale side-to-side and wobble motions, but making it clear it was a model all along. For those who still doubt me, look at the next clip. It's pretty obvious how the models are held up. See that white bar in the top right? That's not a cloud, now is it? This explains why the Oregon model is so close to the camera and filmed in the top half. If the camera was any further back, the stick holding it up would be visible in the top corner of the film, as it still is above. Yeah, not convincing fakes. Then we must also get to Fry, on national TV, absolutely flunking a polygraph test on the poor coach show. I mean, absolutely flunking it. Now, polygraphs are pseudoscientific nonsense, but sometimes they can give little hints if a person is telling the truth. And Fry blatantly wasn't. He published a rambling, rather pathetic article talking about how, quote, the polygraph actually had little or nothing to do with this incident, how all it does is, quote, record the psychological reactions of the subject to the psychological stimuli, but it's obvious he wasn't telling the truth. And it's also likely he wasn't telling the truth about his attempts to build up his radio show. The building for the, quote, Voice of Understanding show would be completed in September '64, but never saw broadcast day because of a lack of funds. Instead, Daniel created an organisation called News, Information, Communications and Entertainment, or NICE Inc. Each donor was given shares in Not So Nice Inc. in accordance with their donations, and Daniel would then make films such as Saucers Unlimited and The Romance of Space, and these films, definitely not overpriced and definitely not a way to launder money, were used during Daniel's talks, which I'm sure people were very happy to have paid for. And so I think Daniel Fry has paid his dues. He died in 1992, still clinging to his story about babbling beings and bogus briefings and other such nonsense, but his story is, nonetheless, fascinating. I haven't even got into how Fry claims he did meet Allen in person, but refused to provide a description of him, how he had to fake certain details to stop the Pentagon finding him, because of course he did, and how Allen made all kinds of nuclear prophecies that failed to come to fruition. But either way, a fascinating man who left behind a weird, wonderful legacy that may or may not have been disinformation from the start. I'm especially drawn by how he described the UFO as having, quote, neither rivets, bolts or screws, exactly in the same way as people describe the Roswell UFO, exactly in the same way as people describe the Aztec UFO, the Kalahari UFO. Sounds a lot like disinformation. It's amazing how laid back also, and suspiciously cool, the government, supposedly covering up aliens, was with him meeting aliens, on their territory, and giving them military books. But either way, let me know what you guys think. Hit like, hit share, hit subscribe, and stay tuned for another episode of Saucercast.